Penguin Random House Audio presents Return to Trad Street by Karen White. Read for you by Aimée Bruneau.
Chapter 1. My eyes flickered open in my Trad Street bedroom, where splinters of light fed slowly into the room through the plantation shutters. The gossamer curtains that my mother had thought would add a touch of femininity to the otherwise masculine space moved softly from cool air being blown out the vent hidden in the wide baseboard. A wet nose and furry ear pressed against my cheek as General Lee's tail fanned my face. Yet none of these creature comforts eased the tightening in my chest that had seized me upon waking, as the reality of my life once again came crashing down on my head like an avalanche with no impediments. Despite a lifetime of being in control of my destiny and what I thought was a fulfilling life, a purpose as a successful realtor, I found myself in the most incomprehensible and extraordinary predicament. I was 40 years old, single, and, most baffling of all, pregnant. I glanced over at my bedside table to the small domed anniversary clock that had belonged to the home's previous owner, Nevin Vanderhorst. Like most everything else in the bedroom and the rest of the house, I'd kept it, although I wasn't altogether sure why. I liked to tell myself it was because the house would be easier to sell if I didn't put too much of a personal stamp on it. But sometimes, like now, I imagined I could hear Mr. Vanderhorst's voice telling me about the love he had for his family's ancestral home. It's a piece of history you can hold in your hands. I hadn't really understood what he'd meant at first, but now I was afraid I was beginning to. I was wary of understanding that connection between history and family. Despite being a native Charlestonian with my own baggage of family trees and old houses, I'd done very well without it for nearly 33 years, after all. At least until my mother, who had abandoned me when I was 6 years old, decided it was time we reconciled. I squinted at the round face of the clock, silently cursing my decision not to replace my electric clock with a similar one, except with even larger, brighter neon numbers I could read without my glasses. I fumbled in the bedside drawer before finding my glasses and sticking them on my nose. 7:30. I jerked up, mortified that I had once again slept in. Not that anyone ever got to Henderson House Realty before 9, but since I'd begun my employment there, I'd been like Old Faithful, always at my desk by 8 o'clock. It's what had put my name on the sales leaderboard in Mr. Henderson's office every single quarter since my first year. A record I'd kept until recently. I'd begun to swing my legs to the side of the bed when the room tilted and the contents of my stomach left over from the night before began to jostle for attention. Groaning, I lay back down on the pillow, feeling no better despite a wet swipe from General Lee's tongue. A brief tapping on the door was followed by the appearance of Mrs. Houlihan, my housekeeper, entering the room carrying a plate of saltines. "Seems I got here just in time. Your mama told me to have these on your bedside table each morning. You're supposed to eat a couple before you even raise your head off the pillow." I'd inherited Mrs. Houlihan along with the dog and the house. Although I was still having doubts about the benefits of the latter two, Mrs. Houlihan was worth her weight in gold. And after studying her broad chest and ample hips, I realized that would be a considerable amount indeed. "Thank you, Mrs. Houlihan," I said as I took a proffered cracker and stuck it on my dry tongue. I left it there to dissolve, afraid that if I moved my mouth too much, my stomach would protest. I closed my eyes to keep the room from spinning and heard the sound again. It was what had awakened me, forgotten as soon as consciousness had claimed me. "Did you hear that?" I asked, lying very still so I could both hear better and wouldn't throw up from any sudden movement. "Hear what?" Her eyes met mine. The sound was so small it would have been easy to ignore, except that it was accompanied by a rush of frigid air, like the door to a tomb had just been opened. "A baby crying," I said. As if he could hear it too, General Lee jumped off the bed and ran out the door. I told myself it was because he was hungry and was searching for food in the kitchen. She smiled and moved to the door. "No babies in this house, at least not yet. Maybe you're hearing a cat on the sidewalk, or your ears are playing tricks on you to help you practice for what's to come." She stopped and faced me again, her bulk filling the doorway. "I'll make you some of that decaffeinated green tea Nola brought over for you. Just lay down and keep eating crackers until you feel like you can sit up." She pointed to the small handbell that my mother had placed next to the clock. "And just give me a ring if you need me." A loud grinding motor started under my window, making me jump. "What's that?" I asked, spitting saltine crumbs into the neck of my nightgown. "That contractor Rich Cobilt is here doing the cleanup from the foundation work. He said he'd told you last week so you'd know to park your car on the street so he could have access to the rear garden." Through a haze of nausea, I allowed my glance to fall on my BlackBerry and new iPhone, neither of which I'd turned on since yesterday, when I'd struggled in from work and fallen into bed around 6:00 p.m. I vaguely recalled a conversation with Mr. Cobilt, even remembered that I'd successfully avoided a full view of his rear cleavage from his ubiquitous drooping pants. I might even have put a note on my various calendars, none of which were any good to me with their power buttons in the off position. My desk calendar at the office was filled with doodles of "he who would not be mentioned," showing him in crudely drawn vignettes and various medieval-type death throes, instead of carefully penned-in appointments. I closed my eyes and groaned. "Don't you worry. Your daddy came by earlier and moved your car so you could sleep a little longer. Take your time and just holler at me if you need something. I'll go feed General Lee." As if he'd heard his name, a sharp bark came from downstairs. Before my pregnancy-induced morning sickness, he and I had shared a biological need to be fed throughout the day and at specific times. Anybody could have set their clocks on either his barks or my increased whininess. Now the thought of food completely unnerved me. I hurled myself out of bed and barely made it to the bathroom in time. An hour and a half later, I struggled downstairs. After rewashing the ends of my hair and replacing my makeup 3 times from subsequent trips to relieve my stomach of all its contents and then some, I'd given up. I'd swiped my hair back into a ponytail and put a little powder on my nose. I didn't bother with my glasses, as I was truly uninterested in seeing the results of my toilette. 2 slices of dry toast, gluten-free, wheat-free, and taste-free, sat on a plate on the table next to the steaming cup of promised decaffeinated green tea. Across the table sat my mother, former opera diva Jeanette Prelo, looking as if she'd just stepped out of an ad for Gwynn's department store. Although in her 60s, she could have easily passed for somebody at least a decade younger, or even a brunette version of Dolly Parton, without the accent, and with a slightly smaller bust. My only consolation with this whole pregnancy thing was that for the first time in my life, I had a reason to be wearing an undergarment that didn't resemble a training bra. I sat down in front of the toast and tried not to picture a chocolate donut. "Good morning, Mother. What brings you here so early?" She took a short sip from her cup. "Do I need a reason? You're my only child, about to give birth to my first grandchild. Isn't that enough?" I eyed her warily. "Nola called you, didn't she?" Nola, the teenage daughter of he who would not be mentioned, and I had formed a bond after her arrival in Charleston earlier that year, following the death of her mother, Bonnie, in California. She'd been living with my mother and me in my mother's house on Legree Street until recently, when my home was deemed fit to live in again after an enormous and bank account emptying foundation repair. She was quirky, funny, musically gifted and smart, and if it hadn't been for her unfortunate...
Sample complete. Ready to continue?